It's so great to see you, and we could talk about war stories of franchising. We have so many different directions we can go. Let's talk about the podcast first. I mean, you've been a producer, you've been a host of Franchise Today now. Is it for 10 seasons?
Yeah, the show is 14 seasons old, and it was originated by another franchising guy that's been around for quite some time, Paul Segreto. And Paul produced that program with a couple of different people, and then for a couple of years on his own. And then about 2013, I was doing a podcast that I called Sensible Franchising. And Paul and I kind of had a conversation with each other about how hard it is. You know, it's a labor of love. I love doing it, but it's like another full-time job. You have to secure guests. You have to line up interviews. You've got to produce the interviews, and you've got to get them on the air. And it's just a lot of work. And so Paul and I decided, would it not make sense for each of us to partner together and have only half the load to lift? And then the two of us can put out a product that we're both proud of and not have it be so laborious. And we did that together for a few years. And then Paul diverged from the franchisor side of the business to his business, taking him into a role that featured more interaction and engagement with prospective franchisees. And so it didn't make a lot of sense for him to keep on with franchisor-based Franchise Today. And I took the reins and have been doing it solo now for probably 6 or 7 years.
That's awesome. Sounds like it's been a lot of fun, hasn't it?
I love it. Frank, think about it. Where else can you go and have conversations with meaningful people who have accomplished things in the world of franchising? And week after week, I mean, the audience gets a kick out of the opportunity to hear from these people. I get a real thrill out of the opportunity to talk with them. And what I do every week is exactly the same. It's all about franchising being an unintentional way of doing business. that unless your last name is Titus or Dwyer or some of those families that are 2 and 3 generations deep into the business model, you know, franchising isn't something that you go to school with an aspiration to become a franchise executive. It doesn't work that way. So you don't find franchising, it finds you. And each week I ask my guests to tell us what that looked like. When did that happen for you? What were you doing that got you connected in the world of franchising? And we begin the conversation that way every single week.
Wow.
And then we just walk up the road from that point of entry, that inflection point, to some of the milestones on the path and on the journey. And we find ourselves about halfway through a 30-minute interview, usually right about there. We take a break and come back and talk about the current day. And we talk about what's going on in that person's world right now and learn about the brand or brands that they're engaged with. And all of these interviews, though, are only invited. The only people I invite, whether they're franchisors, suppliers, or franchisees, is not as important to me as the fact that they've put the word sustainable in front of growth and sensible in front of franchising, and they're going to share nuggets about their journeys into sensible franchising. And each week the audience comes and expects that, and it's a thrill. I mean, it keeps me relevant. Sure, keeps me in front of a lot of people without having to jump airplanes to do it. I'm talking to executives every single week, 50 weeks a year.
That's incredible. All right. Well, so I'm going to flip the script on you. I want to hear about your journey. Why don't you share? Because you're always asking people about their journey, how franchising found them. How did franchising find you?
It found me in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 1988. And I had been in radio for a number of years in broadcast, did everything that you could do except own one, and, you know, worked in stations both in programming and promotion and sales. And my last job was in Fort Lauderdale. It was in sales on a news talk station on the AM dial and a sister classic rock station on the FM dial. And I was discovered by somebody who thought I was wasting my time in the fickle business of radio, which it is very fickle. It, every 13 weeks, another ratings book comes out, and there are knee-jerk reactions to the ratings. And so what was a punk station may now be a gospel station, may 13 weeks later be a country station, for 13 weeks later be a news talk, and then becomes a punk country gospel news talk. And what are you doing but spinning your wheels in that business? But I learned how to manage relationships with ego-driven people in radio. And my focus was car dealers. I called on car dealers and helped them utilize radio as a vehicle to really drive people to their showrooms. And I did it with promotion, and there was some software that the Radio Advertising Bureau made available that enabled you to see how much they were paying for these full page or double trunk ads in Miami Herald and Color. And I could see that if they're spending like 30, 40, 50 grand for a single insertion in the newspaper, I could take color out of that ad and save them a ton of money and use the money that would have paid for the color to buy commercials that I'd produce and put on 6 radio stations telling people to watch for my ad in the Miami Herald. And I'd still have some money left over to maybe be able to land the Miami Dolphin cheerleaders or somebody on, from a helicopter on the lot, come to the promotion, come get free Coke. We drove business and did that through radio with ego-driven people that were car dealers. So I got recruited to ERA Real Estate by somebody who thought that I'd been wasting my time just doing what I do in radio. We're going to teach you franchising where you can really make a difference in people's lives. And ERA wanted me to take independent real estate brokers who, like car dealers, are some of the most egocentric people in the world, and be able to have conversations with them about how you think you're the biggest and the mightiest in the market. But if you don't buy this franchise, someone else will, and you're going to be competing with the biggest and mightiest in the market. And so it was that kind of a fear of loss was the motivator kind of mentality. But I was good at that. And I'd never lived in a house, Frank. I grew up in an apartment in Brooklyn, New York. I mean, I never was a homebody. But I took to real estate, and I took to the people in real estate, and I learned how to sell those franchises, and I made me and ERA and then Prudential and others a lot of money converting independent brokers to the ERA brand. And that's where I began in franchising. And then from there moved through to the more mainstream. I got into food with Blimpie subs and salads, and I became a partner in Wing Zone, which led to the National Buffalo Wing Hall of Fame becoming a part of my life. I got into ice cream with Maggie Moo's. I got into the internet, and I was working with a company that is still at the front of its game today called WSI. And so I've been around the world of franchising. I've been around Frank Fumey and I9 Sports. I did consulting for you many years ago. What I've learned is how to change shirts gracefully, but collect people along the way. And that's been my cornerstone.
That's great. You have. What is changing? What do you see as a big shift in franchising today that maybe is different from 10 years, maybe 5 years ago? Like what do you see is this? Because there's several shifts, are there not?
Oh, there are some, there are some
gargantuan,
more than shifts. Yeah, there are tremors. And I mean, the industry has moved to being about a single founder of a single brand, like a Frank Fumey, to that single brand now being part of a portfolio of companies underneath another banner in private equity, and even portfolio companies within brands. So home service brands marrying up with one another and becoming multi-branded concepts that are cross-promoting and touching people 6 ways instead of just one.
It's crazy.
So if you have home services businesses, like look at Neighborly and what they've done, you just take 6 or 7 different ways that you can serve a consumer at their home. And you've got that customer not once now, but 6 or 7 more times. You can do their roof, you can do their flooring, you can do their backyards, and literally you scale that to a back office that works across all those brands. And so now you don't have 4 or 5 or 6 different sets of attorneys and marketing people and franchise development people. You've got one team in the back of the house driving all of the disciplines that are needed to drive the front of the house across those brands. So the economies of scale become really different than they used to be when it was just Frank Fiume with a good idea that he grew into a company that made a lot of sense singularly, but under an umbrella of companies now, or brands now that are held by a company like Rourke. I mean, there's no end to where it's going. It's becoming a lot bigger a business. It's no longer a cottage industry. It's become a really big business.
In a very short time, too. I remember, I can go back 5, maybe 6 years ago when we were going to do our initial transaction. I'll never forget that what I was told by the investment bankers back about 7 years ago is, these PE guys, they look for you to be about 5 million EBITDA before you get anybody's attention. And I just recently talked with a franchisor who said to me, hey, I'm part of a portfolio. And I knew, but at the same time though, Stan, he had just told me he was brand new. And I said, how many units do you have? And he says, we have one franchise. I said, you have one franchise unit and you're part of a portfolio? He says, yeah, we just got bought out as a home service franchise. And that baffles me because here it was only 7 years ago that there was like milestones. You got to be like 5 million EBITDA before you get somebody's attention. Then it went down to 3 million, then 2 million. And now we've got somebody who I talked to that has literally one franchise unit and he's already, sucked into this umbrella. But I get it. It makes sense to me to have this rolled up and the centralized services. What are your thoughts though on long-term franchising? Is this a good thing, bad thing? How do you think this is going to shake out?
Well, I think it's going to take, like anything else, that the strong survive. I think it's going to become more and more difficult for a founder
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.